The morning rush began before the sun had fully risen, the restaurant's interior still cast in shadows that the flickering fluorescence couldn't completely chase away. She arrived earlier than needed, as always, slipping through the back door unnoticed, her fingers already tying the faded apron around her waist. The fabric, once crisp and new, now hung loose and thin from repeated washes, stained permanently with coffee spills and traces of fryer grease. She moved through the prep area like clockwork, aligning sugar containers, polishing glassware, checking salt shakers, each task executed with mechanical precision, not because anyone told her to, but because this was how she stayed invisible in a place that saw her only when something went wrong. She had worked here long enough to know who arrived late, who stole silverware, who lied on their timesheets, who cried in the walk-in freezer. But no one knew her. They didn't ask about her life, didn't wonder where she went when the shift was over, didn't notice when her name was misspelled on the schedule. She wasn't rude. She was polite, even warm at times. But she had learned that proximity invited familiarity, and familiarity opened the door to expectation. And she could not afford to give anything more than her presence. The regulars began trickling in, the ones who never remembered her name but always remembered to complain. The man who refused tap water. The woman who insisted her eggs were never hot enough. The elderly couple who left exact change and crumbs. She approached each table with the same neutral expression, her voice soft, her eyes alert but never too direct. If she showed too much cheerfulness, they would take it as flirtation. If she remained too distant, they would call her cold. It was a tightrope she had mastered, just pleasant enough to earn tolerance, just invisible enough to avoid confrontation. But no day ever passed without someone crossing the line. This morning, it was a woman in a tailored suit, her nails lacquered blood red, phone in one hand, impatience in the other. She waved her over without looking up, pointed to a water ring on the table like it was a personal insult. The look she gave her was sharp, the kind reserved for insects on marble countertops. The woman leaned back as if disgusted by the mere presence of someone who worked for a living. When the coffee came 2 minutes too late, she made a show of sighing. When her toast was slightly overdone, she snapped her fingers and pushed the plate aside. The other tables watched but said nothing. The manager looked once and looked away. No one defended her. No one acknowledged her discomfort. She absorbed it like she always did, internally, quietly, letting the shame settle into her bones while her hands kept moving. The shift continued, hours blurring into one another like dirty water. Plates stacked. Orders piled. The bell above the kitchen window rang nonstop. She dodged elbows, caught dishes before they hit the floor, kept pace with the chaos. All the while, the woman at table 5 remained a thorn, an echo of disdain that didn't leave even when she finally paid and left nothing behind but crumbs and contempt. Her table was the last to be cleared. No one else wanted to touch it. She bent down, collected the dirty dishes, and felt the heat of eyes on her back. Someone was laughing at something. Maybe at her. Maybe not. It didn't matter. It felt the same. She took her break late, as usual, 15 minutes in the corner of the storeroom where the ceiling leaked during storms. She didn't eat. She didn't talk. She scrolled through numbers on her phone, studied columns she had filled with every expense, every cent saved, every line of credit she hadn't touched yet. It grounded her, reminded her that this was temporary. This was fuel. The humiliation was currency, and she was storing it like energy. Back on the floor, a tray slipped from another server's hand and crashed near the entrance. Glass shattered. Liquid spread. The manager barked orders, and somehow it was she who was sent to clean it up. On her knees in front of strangers, she mopped up remnants of drinks she hadn't served, apologizing with her silence. Wiping the floor that others dirted, erasing the evidence of carelessness she had no part in. Her palms were wet. Her apron soaked through. A child pointed and laughed. The mother didn't stop him. Another table whispered. She kept wiping. By the end of the shift, her shoulders ached and her shoes had left imprints of her steps in dirty water. The restaurant slowly emptied. The lights dimmed. No one thanked her. No one told her she could go. She hung her apron on the hook by the door, walked past the others without a word, and stepped out into the evening chill. The sky was bruised purple and the streetlights had started to buzz. Her reflection followed her in the dark windows as she passed storefronts, unnoticed by the city that swallowed the tired and poor without blinking. But deep inside her chest, beneath the shame and silence, a fire flickered, a heat no one could see, growing brighter with every insult, every eye roll, every finger snap. She had a name. She had a plan. And one day, the world that dismissed her would choke on her silence. She returned the next day with the same routine, the same practiced quietude, the same subtle armor that made her forgettable to most. The people who dined there never once considered her capable of thought beyond memorizing orders, of ambition beyond a double shift. And why would they? She blended in. She didn't make noise. She didn't complain. She carried herself like a shadow, trained to occupy space without consequence. But while others forgot her name within minutes, she remembered theirs, their habits, their patterns, and their words. She was collecting data not in spreadsheets, but in memory, in observation, in meticulous awareness that no one expected from someone in worn-out sneakers and a borrowed smile. Every table became a case study. The banker who came in twice a week and made late-night calls about accounts that didn't add up. The middle manager who drank too much at lunch and overcompensated with bravado. The young couple who whispered about taking out loans they couldn't afford. She heard it all. No one filtered their speech around her. They didn't think she had the capacity to understand, to retain, to analyze. It gave her an advantage that no degree could replicate, the ability to read people when they were unguarded. She understood risk because she saw it in real time. She understood leverage because she lived on the edge of it. Her apartment became a war room. Receipts from her side business lined the walls, charts and notepads stacked like defense plans. She didn't sleep much. She didn't socialize. Every spare moment was spent learning about asset acquisition, about debt relief strategies, about how failing businesses changed hands. She mapped out weaknesses in the restaurant's infrastructure like a surgeon preparing for delicate operation. She discovered the place was bleeding money not just from mismanagement, but from a lack of vision. The owner wasn't malicious, just lazy. Just rich enough to care too little. His attention had drifted to new ventures, and the restaurant was a legacy he no longer wanted but didn't yet know how to offload. She knew before anyone else that the business was collapsing from within. The staff blamed the economy, the competition, the fickleness of customers, but she saw the truth in the inventory logs and delayed payments. She watched managers get increasingly desperate, stretching supply runs, dodging vendor calls, pretending it was all under control. But it wasn't. It was teetering. And she was waiting. Not idly, never idly. Every paycheck went into an account with no name on it but hers. Every tip was cataloged. Every late-night order on her website funneled into the same fund. She had no backup plan. This was it. This was the way out. She spoke with lawyers in secret, consultants who owed her favors, old friends who still respected her intellect even if they didn't know what she was doing. Piece by piece, she began building the scaffolding of ownership. Not through brute force, but through silence. Through patience. Through the power of being ignored for so long that no one noticed her preparing to win. By the time she knew she could do it, the place was already half hers, not in paperwork, not yet, but in the way she understood it better than anyone else. She moved through its bones like someone who had grown up in its halls. She knew when the freezer leaked. She knew which chairs rocked. She knew which suppliers delivered late and which menu items no longer turned a profit. The restaurant had become her battlefield and her blueprint, a crumbling institution she would soon hold in her hands. She still wore the apron, still took the orders, still endured the sighs and rolled eyes and cutting remarks. But none of it touched her anymore. Her skin had thickened, not with numbness, but with purpose. She had already started making calls. Quiet, confident inquiries. She knew the owner's vulnerabilities, debts wrapped in LLCs, property lines tangled with personal liabilities, a messy divorce settlement that loomed like a shadow. It wasn't malice that drove her. It was necessity. She had spent too long letting others dictate her worth. She would no longer ask for permission to rise. She would take what they had offered to no one because they assumed no one like her could ever want it. Her days were spent waiting tables. Her nights were spent reading contracts. When other servers went home to numb themselves with television or friends or sleep, she lit a desk lamp and studied leverage ratios. When others complained about hours, she calculated equity positions. It was lonely, but loneliness was something she had made peace with long ago. It was the only companion that didn't disappoint her. She trusted it. It kept her sharp. The manager began to notice something, a shift in how she moved, in the way she watched him. He began to feel uneasy, though he didn't understand why. He tried to reassert control, handing out reprimands for petty infractions, raising his voice just a little more often. But she didn't flinch. She let him have his illusion of authority because soon it would be gone. The final meeting was scheduled in a neutral office far from the noise of kitchen clatter and customer complaints. She didn't wear the apron that day. She wore a blazer. Not flashy, not expensive, but clean, precise, purposeful. The lawyer representing the owner was young, distracted, unprepared. He assumed she was there to negotiate hours, maybe file a complaint. He didn't realize she held the keys until the documents were signed. When it was done, she walked out into the morning light and took a breath that felt like it belonged to a different person. The waitress was still inside her, in muscle memory, in instinct, but she was something else now. Not just a woman with a job. A woman with a building. With employees. With a future. She didn't announce it right away. There was no fanfare. No corporate email blast. She continued to show up to work as usual, nodding to the cooks, answering to the same manager who still believed he held authority. She let the days stretch out one by one as the change settled into the walls like a scent no one could place. Something was different, but no one could name it. She watched with a clarity she'd never had before. The manager's favoritism. The subtle exploitation. The way new staff were treated like burdens thrown into chaos without training or kindness. She observed how veteran servers were overworked and underpaid, how their ideas were dismissed while the same problems recurred. She saw the rot in the culture, not just in the finances. And now that it was hers, she knew she had to cleanse it. The transformation began in whispers. A new code of conduct appeared on the bulletin board. A new payroll policy was announced. Anonymous surveys were distributed. Raises followed. Staff who had long been mistreated suddenly found themselves being heard. Some were skeptical, believing it a temporary appeasement. Others were afraid to hope. She didn't force belief. She let results speak. The manager resisted change. He pushed back. Questioned policies. Undermined her quietly. Until he found himself called into the office, not by a supervisor, but by the owner. And when he sat across from her and truly realized who she was and what she had become, his face drained of power. She didn't gloat. She didn't humiliate him. She offered him the same respect he had never offered her. He didn't take it. He quit. She let him walk away. Customers began to notice. Not just the food, which improved with better ingredients, but the energy. The smiles were genuine now. The staff stood taller. The air was lighter. Tips increased. Reviews improved. The restaurant began to shine in ways it hadn't in years. And still, she stayed in the background. Because it was never about being seen. It was about changing what had once made her feel invisible. The seasons shifted outside the windows, but inside the restaurant, time seemed to crystallize into quiet victory. She no longer moved through the floor with the same cautious precision. Her steps were still light, her presence still composed, but something about her had changed. It wasn't power in the conventional sense, not loud or brash or obvious. It was deeper, settled in the way others now paused when she entered a room, the way her name traveled through conversations with a new kind of reverence. She had gone from unseen to undeniable, and yet she had made no announcement, worn no crown. She simply began acting like what she had always been, someone who was never meant to be underestimated. The restaurant's culture transformed from the inside out. Every decision she made came from memory, from empathy, from years of standing in corners where no one looked. She eliminated the structures that allowed for cruelty to flourish. The petty tyrannies of management were replaced with systems that rewarded consistency, integrity, and care. Training became comprehensive. New employees were welcomed with mentorship. Mistakes were addressed with patience. Praise became common, not currency. She knew exactly what it felt like to dread a shift, and she was determined that no one working under her would feel that same slow dread seep into their bones. It wasn't perfect. Some staff resisted. A few clung to the old hierarchies, where tenure equaled dominance, where kindness was mistaken for weakness. She handled it without spectacle. She didn't need to prove anything. Those who couldn't adjust quietly left. Those who stayed began to realize they were part of something rare, a workplace that cared not just in theory but in policy. She noticed the change most in the silences. The way the back room no longer echoed with sobs. The way hands didn't tremble when approaching the office. The way people looked her in the eyes now instead of past her. Outside, the restaurant's reputation grew. Local magazines wrote glowing reviews not just of the food, but of the atmosphere. Customers returned not just for meals, but for the experience of being in a place where the air felt different, warmer, safer, intentional. She still didn't plaster her name on the walls. She still answered phones, washed dishes when short-staffed, covered shifts when someone's child was sick. Her leadership wasn't performative. It was habitual. She had lived the lowest rung so long that humility had become a reflex, not a tactic. And yet, beneath the quiet, there was steel. She didn't forget. Every night, after the last guest had gone and the chairs were turned over tables, she sat alone in the office and reviewed numbers. She wasn't building a fairy tale. She was running a business. She had made hard choices, had let staff go when needed, had closed underperforming nights, had renegotiated contracts with vendors who tried to exploit her. Her compassion had limits, and those limits were carved from years of being dismissed. Mercy, yes, but never again at the cost of her own dignity. Sometimes she thought about the woman in the red nails, about the men who called her sweetheart with vinegar in their tone, about the manager who once whispered behind her back that she'd never be more than a pair of hands. They were gone now, replaced by new faces, new stories. And yet, in a strange way, they were part of her success. They were the grit she had swallowed to become who she was. She didn't need their apology. Their absence was enough. She never imagined that ownership would be so quiet. Not the act of buying that had been filled with adrenaline and signatures and the rush of finally reclaiming control. But the aftermath, the day-to-day of it, was subtler. There were no trumpets, no celebratory banners, just spreadsheets, staff meetings, small, daily decisions that shaped the rhythm of everything. She found peace in the repetition, satisfaction in the details. This wasn't a movie. This was better. This was real. Each day started before dawn, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She liked walking through the empty restaurant, the way the morning light spilled across the booths, the silence that held no judgment. It reminded her of the early days when she had opened those same doors as an employee with sore feet and a bowed head. Now she opened them with steady hands and a clear mind. The space belonged to her, but more than that, the narrative did. She had rewritten it, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they were just anything. Just a waitress. Just a cook. Just a busser. She knew now that those titles had been weapons designed to shrink people into manageable boxes. But she had broken out of hers. And she had held the door open behind her. Some customers still came in and tried to test the boundaries. They snapped fingers. They spoke down. They assumed. And when they did, they were met with a calm correction, not by her, but by the staff she had trained, nurtured, protected. Respect was now institutional, not optional, not requested, but expected. The restaurant had become more than a business. It was a quiet rebellion against the ordinary. A place where kindness was enforced, not begged for. A place that had been built brick by brick from every moment she had once swallowed whole. She no longer wore the apron, though she kept it folded in a drawer in her office, a relic of who she had been. Sometimes she took it out just to remind herself. Not of pain, but of growth. Of what it took to get here. The bruises, the sweat, the silence. The way she had once questioned if she'd ever escape the loop of survival long enough to live. Now, she didn't just live. She created a space for others to live with her. There were days she still doubted herself. Days when numbers dipped or staff quit or storms kept the restaurant empty. But she met those days with the same grit that had carried her through humiliation. She remembered the child who had once laughed at her on the floor. She remembered the shame that had colored her skin like a bruise. Those memories didn't haunt her anymore. They fueled her. And in the end, she didn't need revenge. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone who had ever looked down on her. Because when she stood in the center of that restaurant, listening to laughter that wasn't cruel, watching a young new hire be embraced rather than dismissed, she knew she had already won. She was never just a waitress. She was the one who changed everything.